Nation. Welcome to the Bayou Blitz pregame show. I'm Brendan Boylan, joined by my friend and colleague Bob Rose, as we welcome you to the final week, not just of the regular season for the New Orleans Saints, but the final game of the season for the Saints, as they've been mathematically eliminated from playoff contention. Bob, first and foremost, how you doing this Sunday? And hopefully it's a little warmer for you guys up there than it has been lately.
Happy Sunday to you, Brendan. I hope you and your family are doing well. Yeah, we're doing okay. The weather is a typical January in Western Pennsylvania. It's in the mid 30s right now, I think. Snow flurries in the air, nothing significant, and of course, there's no sun to speak of whatsoever. So you get used to that.
Well, maybe we know the secrets behind Angry Bob. Maybe it's just living in Western Pennsylvania, not seeing the sun for a couple months.
You know what? The climate and the majority of the people here, that does explain Angry Bob a lot.
Hey, we'll make sure we write that down and we have it on file so we know the real reason. But anyway, New Orleans Saints, Carolina Panthers, these teams met all the way back in week 3. And I think it's safe to say for both teams that the teams that they currently have are 180-degree turn of what the team was in week 3. For the Panthers, they still had Baker Mayfield as their starting quarterback. He's now with the Los Angeles Rams. The New Orleans Saints had Jameis Winston at quarterback. It's now Andy Dalton. And the Panthers have a new head coach as Matt Rule was let go. And Wilkes has done a fantastic job there. And that's a conversation we can have later on whether he's going to stay or not. But both these teams have gone through seasons within a season, if you will, to get to this point, both mathematically eliminated. But as we talked to Willie Whitehead on Wednesday on the Bayou Blitz podcast, there are no meaningless games in the NFL. You're always playing for something. What are you looking for out of the New Orleans Saints today? They're playing a division rival. They're in the Superdome. They want to let those fans leave with more of a sweet than sour taste in their mouth to end the season. What are your expectations of the team today?
Yeah, Brendan, going back to what Willie talked to us about on Wednesday, I get extremely angry whenever fans talk about there's nothing to play for, fold it in, the year is over, things like that. Talk to the players and coaches. They probably feel differently. And if they don't, then you're talking about a dysfunctional organization, which I do not think the Saints are at this point. And you're right, both franchises have gone through seasons within seasons. You mentioned the quarterbacks, the head coach for Carolina, and to depress you a little bit further, Saints fans, Matt Rule's only win as a head coach in 6 or 7 games this year were against, in fact, the New Orleans Saints. But remember, the Panthers also had Robbie Anderson at wide receiver. He was shipped away. Dante Jackson, J.C. Horn, a pair of outstanding cover corners for the Panthers. They're both on injured reserve. The Saints, they had Michael Thomas, Jarvis Landry still playing pretty well. That's no longer the case. They had an intact offensive line. That's not to be the case. Marshawn Lattimore, who is back today, came back last week. That was, I think, the last full game that Marshawn played before missing 10 games. And we can go on and on. But listen, I know the Tampa Bay Buccaneers officially wrapped up the dysfunctional NFC South last week, but I believe the Saints and the Panthers were playing the best football of any of the other 2 teams in the division over the last half of the year, especially the Saints, who are looking to close out the year on a 4-game winning streak, their longest since midway through the 2020 season. So I look for both teams to play hard. Steve Wilkes, the interim coach for the Panthers, he's looking to hold on to perhaps the permanent label of coach of the Panthers going forward. New Orleans, I don't think, a lot of us don't believe that Dennis Allen's job is in jeopardy, but that seat could get awful hot going into 2023 if your team goes out and lays an egg in the season finale against a divisional rival. So the Saints have played extremely well on defense over the last half of the year. You look for that to continue. And there are several individual accolades that these Saints are going to be playing for, not to mention the fact that this is a division rival and you always want to play hard against them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you said, personal accolades, incentives for contracts. There's no big ones for the Saints this year, as there has been in years past. But whether it's an incentive that does pay you now, or whether it's the incentive to play well to where you can get paid in the offseason, there's incentives here for all these guys. This is a final audition tape, excuse me, for some of these guys. Um, guys like Benjamin that we've talked about a lot hasn't had a lot of opportunity. In his 2 games with the New Orleans Saints where he's been active, but this could very well be an audition tape for a guy like Benjamin or some of the receivers to prove like, hey, I deserve to be on this roster next year, at least brought into training camp. Official injuries just dropped, so let's go ahead and look at this. The Saints ruled out 2 players going into the final game of the season. That was Andrus Peat and Paulson Adebo. So those 2 out. But let's look at the remainder of it. Marcus May will miss yet another game. He's got a shoulder injury. Justin Evans will miss with a shoulder injury. Kirk Merritt is out with as a healthy scratch. Ryan Ramczyk is out with hip and rest. So if anything, he probably would have given it a go if it was a game that did impact whether the Saints made the playoffs or not, but he's not going to go today. JP Holtz inactive and Peyton Turner inactive for the Saints today. And Peyton Turner is a healthy scratch as well, which is a little bit of a surprise. But Bob, out of all that you've seen, I highlighted the offensive line as my X factors. I kind of cheated the final week of the season. I didn't pick like a single player. I said the entire offensive line is going to be an X factor because you're going to be missing multiple starters again. Obviously, Cesar Ruiz, IR, his season has been done for a couple weeks now. Andrus Peat out, and now Ramczyk out. James Hurst, who is questionable, is going to go. But how does that affect what you do, and what does that mean for first-round pick Trevor Penning in today's ball game?
Well, you know what? I'm not surprised that Ramczyk is inactive. Like you said, if this were a playoff game or a game to make the playoffs, we're talking probably a different story with Ram. But there's no reason to risk further injury whatsoever. That's where the term meaningless game should come into play. And again, I hate that word, but for lack of a better term, you shouldn't risk any further injury to perhaps jeopardize or shorten a career for any player whatsoever. There's just no reason to do it. And if I were Dennis Allen, I would absolutely move James Hurst over to the right tackle spot where we've seen James play pretty well in the past and give Trevor Penning his first start at left tackle. We've seen Penning involved in a lot of jumbo packages since his return off the injured reserve list in late November. I want to see more from the rookie. He is obviously going to be the favorite to be the starter at left tackle to open 2023. So why not give him his audition now, especially against the Carolina's Panthers defense, who's been reeling a little bit lately, but can still bring heavy pressure on an opposing backfield. If you don't make that move, if you don't start Penning at left tackle, then we'll obviously most likely see Landon Young at the right tackle spot, in place of Ramczyk while they keep Hurst in at left tackle. Josh Andrews is almost certainly going to get the start in Pete's spot, while Calvin Throckmorton will continue to play for Ruiz. Obviously, depth is a huge, huge concern, because all those names I just mentioned, there's literally nobody behind them. So, the Saints are really down to 6 quality offensive linemen today against an aggressive Panthers front 7, who we've seen gives the Saints all kinds of difficulties and fits, the last 3, 4, 5 times that these teams have met. So, the offensive line being called out as an X factor on your part, it's absolutely, right on the head. But like I said, I would like to see Trevor Penning get the start. No respect to Landon Young, but Trevor Penning is your first-round draft choice. He is your future until otherwise proven. Young is a quality swing tackle, quality backup, pinch starter. But having said that, you already know what you have in Landon Young. Well, he doesn't have a lot of starting experience either. Again, getting that experience for Trevor Penning, in my view, is much more valuable than giving it to Landon Young.
Absolutely. Landon Young was one of those guys, a late round pick that a couple of us were surprised fell as far as he did.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a lot of size, but it was more the intangibles that needed work. And yes, while you can grow on that and throwing him in the starting lineup today, kind of want to see it out of your first-round draft pick opposed to your sixth-round draft pick from a few years ago. Let's look at the Carolina Panthers and their inactives today. Rashard Higgins, the receiver, will be inactive. The big name on this list, Brian Burns, will be inactive for the Carolina Panthers. Also note that there have been a lot of injuries to the Carolina Panthers defensive backfield, and Josh Norman will start at corner today as he's been elevated from the practice squad. What in the 2023 is going on? Because Josh Norman, it's been a long time since we've said that name. And in Josh Norman's respect, a couple fantastic years with the Carolina Panthers, was a thorn in the side of the Saints for most of his Carolina career. Fell off towards the bitter end. From reports, owns his own coffee shop and was very active at the shop, actually being a barista at times throughout the day, and then gets a phone call if he wants to come back and join the Carolina Panthers practice squad. And now he's starting against the New Orleans Saints in the Superdome. Opposite him is going to be C.J. Henderson, who is a very quality young defensive back. But, Bob, you wrote about it earlier today. This could be a game where the Saints could really thrive in the passing attack. Seeing the injuries that have now amounted for the Panthers and knowing that a guy like Norman's starting today, where can the Saints really attack this battered Panthers defense?
Well, you know what? You see that on paper, and like you said, Josh Norman was a great player back in his day. And it's a cool story bringing him in from the coffee shop line. But I all Saints fans certainly hope that it doesn't end with a happy ending today. On paper, you would think that you would come out and target the rusty, aging veteran that is Josh Norman, but C.J. Henderson has been absolutely atrocious in coverage for the last few weeks, and I agree with you. I love C.J. coming out of Florida. I loved him in college, but these are the statistics that stuck out to me since losing Dante Jackson a few weeks ago, and then they lost J.C. Horn, their other terrific cornerback, 2 weeks ago. But since losing Dante Jackson, the Panthers have allowed 4 100-yard receivers and an average of 289 yards passing through. So that's key. And anybody that Saints fans probably followed that Panthers Buccaneers game last week, rooting in vain, for the Panthers. And the key to that game was Tom Brady to Mike Evans. Brady completed, I think, 10 passes to Evans, scored 3 touchdowns for over 200 yards. And, Mike Evans, he's a good wideout, but he ain't that guy. Before Jared Goff and Tom Brady threw for over 300 yards against Carolina the last 2 weeks, the Panthers had only given up 1 300-yard passer all season. His name? Some guy by the name of Jameis Winston back in week 3 for the New Orleans Saints. And in that game, Chris Olave had the best statistical production of what's been a fantastic rookie year, catching 9 passes for about 147 yards. And even the usually invisible Traquan Smith had 105 yards receiving. When Traquan Smith has 100 yards against your secondary, when they're healthy, if I'm the Saints, I open up that playbook a little bit. I know that New Orleans has established their identity over the backstretch. That is ball control, infuriatingly ultra conservative play calling, let the defense win the game and try to control the ball with your running game. I get that. And it's been successful the last few weeks. But I would be awfully tempted to open up that playbook, seeing what my rookies Olave and Rashid Shaheed could really do, and maybe giving Alvin Kamara a couple reps lined up from the slot or even out wide. That's the way I would attack the Panthers, especially early in the game, because if you're successful, that's going to open up opportunities for your runners as the game advances.
Yeah, and another thing to point out about that Week 3 matchup is Olave was targeted 13 times in that game, and there were a ton of shots downfield. Obviously, Jameis Winston's arm strength versus Andy Dalton, a little bit of a different story there, but you're going to have those opportunities. You've already seen it on tape once. How can you take advantage of it yet another time? And the Panthers are going to be preparing the best that they can for that. And going back to Josh Norman, at this point, 35 years old, is now, quick math, 7 years removed from his only all-pro season in 2015. You saw it throughout the last couple stops of his career, whether it was in Washington or in Buffalo, has lost a step. You're going to have some opportunities to go deep against a guy like Josh Norman. And if there's some safety help, shoot. Another name that I forgot to mention is active, who is questionable, is Taysom Hill. You're going to have opportunities with Taysom Hill to run right up the gut and get some good yards. And that's going to open up opportunities to have Taysom Hill run. I don't even know if you want to call it a trick play because we all think he's running the football, but it's going to give Taysom opportunities to launch it downfield as well. Good arm strength on Taysom Hill. The accuracy, but the arm strength there, certainly better than Andy Dalton too. So you're going to have some opportunities to mix it up. And remember, Rashid Shaheed wasn't a part of this team back in week 3 as well. Right. You want to talk about speed, a guy that can really break the game open against a depleted defense. I see that being an opportunity as well. Flipping it to the Saints defense, we talked about the carousel of quarterbacks that has started for the Carolina Panthers. Saints fans might be having a little bit of a flashback moment because it looks an awful lot like the 2021 New Orleans Saints with their quarterback carousel. Now the Panthers have started Baker Mayfield, PJ Walker, Sam Darnold. Am I missing anybody?
Yeah, I know. I think you got them all.
Okay. So Sam Darnold over the last few weeks has actually played pretty good football. 5 touchdowns to 1 interception over the last 3 weeks. He's averaging about 275 yards over the last 3 weeks. You're starting to see that resurgence, which the Panthers are now in an odd spot as well because they'll have a high draft pick, win or lose this game, where they could go after a quarterback. But Sam Darnold, who you spent picks on, is starting to turn a corner a little bit as well. How do the Saints stop Sam Darnold? And yeah, there's some injuries to the Panthers, and their receiving corps outside of DJ Moore is a list of who's who. But who are some threats on that team that Saints fans should be looking for?
DJ Moore is the biggest threat by far. But the Saints secondary should not overlook former LSU wideout Terrace Marshall or Shi Smith, who's a big physical target, along with Laviska Shenault. I love Shenault when he came out of the draft a couple of years ago from Colorado. I think he has the skill set that can be used very much the same way as the San Francisco 49ers use Deebo Samuel. Shenault is that good in the open field. He hasn't blossomed because his route tree just hasn't expanded yet. But we saw what kind of open field speed Laviska has because he took that short pass against New Orleans in week 3 and turned it into a 67-yard touchdown like that. And that was really, really the game clincher as the Saints were starting to claw back into that game. I like the Saints secondary, their matchup against the Carolina receivers. They just can't overlook the athleticism. And you can't let a guy like Sam Darnold get hot and get into a rhythm. We saw in week 2 of the 2021 season what that could mean. Darnold got off to a hot start against New Orleans and really tore them apart. He threw for well over 300 yards that day in another upset victory, by the Panthers in Charlotte. And the Saints really weren't able to rattle him all day. But the thing about Sam Darnold is this, and it's been this way since day one. You get to him. You get pressure on him. You don't necessarily have to get him on the ground, but if you get pressure on him, he will get rattled. He will start throwing the ball, spraying the ball all over the field, highly inaccurate under pressure, and ultimately will throw an interception or two that could and would turn the game. So, the key to Darnold is getting pressure on him, no doubt, not allowing him to get into a rhythm, and not really allowing DJ Moore to get going forward. I know Paulson Adebo is out, but I still love this, and Marcus May for that matter, but I still love this matchup with the Saints secondary, particularly Marshawn Lattimore and Alontae Taylor.
And Alontae Taylor is excited to play with Marshawn Lattimore. You guys go just check his Twitter feed from 12 hours ago when the news came out that Adebo wasn't playing, and Alontae Taylor knows he's going to be the number 2 corner opposite of Marshawn Lattimore. He's really excited to play with that guy. And, we've had some conversation. I'm certain we'll have more conversation going into the offseason on the Bayou Blitz podcast about potential cap casualties or guys that could be traded. Marshawn Lattimore's a name that kind of came up a little bit. But before he got hurt, in my opinion, was having an all-pro season. Had a great game last week against Philadelphia, including a pick six, his second touchdown of his career. And then you go back and if he goes back and has another good game today, I would start to think that his name would kind of come off that list of names of potential trade targets because of how valuable he is. It's hard to find really good corners in the league. That's going to make him an attractive trade piece for other teams who are going to call. But I don't think the Saints are going to be able to do it at that point. And Cameron Jordan's going to be another interesting one, too. I highlighted him as my X factor today, and everything you just said about rattling Sam Darnold. And you know that Cam Jordan's on a little bit of a high as well.
Yeah.
Coming off of his NFC Defensive Player of the Week honors, 3 sacks, got the sack record, a New Orleans Saints franchise sack record. And that's a guy that if you check his social media too, there's been some guys that have reached out in the comments and said, when you come in to join, my team or whatever, and highlighting single players and saying, you excited to play with him next year? And Cam responding like, oh, he's coming to New Orleans. So, Cam wants to be here as well. Now, again, that's a conversation we will get into throughout the off season. Looking at this one, we talked about some incentives for some of these players and some records that are on the line, none bigger than Alvin Kamara, who has the chance to break the Saints touchdown record today. It's held by Marcus Colston. Bob, do you think the coaching staff's aware of that? And do you think if the Saints get first and goal inside the 5, it's going to be Kamara all day?
Kamara all day, no. Because this red zone offense has been predicated around Taysom Hill all year. For better or for worse, that's just what it is. And Alvin, to his discredit, he hasn't played really well in the red zone either. Hasn't cashed in on some of those touchdown opportunities. But having said that, coaches are usually aware of this kind of thing going in, especially going into a season finale where they know they're not going to the playoffs afterward. So I do think that in certain situations, Alvin is going to get the first crack at the touchdown rather than an Adam Prentice or a Taysom Hill like we've seen in recent weeks. Because like you said, we're talking about an all-time franchise record, where Kamara is tied with an all-time franchise great, in Marcus Colston, with an opportunity to pass him and take over sole possession after only 6 years in the National Football League and a down year by Kamara's standards. That's some pretty high accolades. I'm looking at Cam Jordan, who only needs a 1.5 sacks for his 7th double-digit sack season of his career. That would break a franchise tie with Ricky Hall of Famer Ricky Jackson, for the all-time franchise lead. Chris Olave. I think Chris has to have a big game. He needs 156 yards, but by doing so, he would take over the Saints rookie receiving record for a receiving yardage record. He only needs 18 yards to join Michael Thomas and Colston as the only rookie receivers in Saints history to have 1,000 yards. So, there's some big things on the line. It might not seem like a great deal to the average person, especially the average person who, never achieved much in sports. I'm sorry, but the people that are knocking, these kind of things, it's those people. But it means a lot to these players. It means a lot to the coaches, franchise, and teammates too. Trust me.
Oh, absolutely. And for Alvin particularly, Marcus Colston's the greatest player to never make a Pro Bowl. You also mentioned the amount of time it's taken Alvin, just 6 years to the career that Marcus Colston had, which was 10 plus, if I'm not mistaken, or right at 10. So to essentially do it in almost half the time is remarkable. And to your credit as well, you mentioned it's been a down year for Kamara, especially finding the end zone. I would love to see Kamara get it this year, and maybe that jumpstarts something into a more successful year next season if he's here. I had to throw that in for Bob because that's going to be a conversation. Yeah, just got to reel them in for the off season viewership, Bob. But as we close out the pregame show, Bob, I wanted to ask you this before we go into predictions. what's your biggest takeaway from this year, or what's one positive that you'll look back on the season for, and what's a negative you'll look back on this season for?
The positives are definitely the development of this rookie class. The jury is still out on Trevor Penning only because he hasn't gotten major opportunities yet. DeMarco Jackson, a linebacker who I was really high on, has been on IR all year. But you have Chris Olave, firmly entrenched as the number one wide receiver, looking like a future perennial Pro Bowler. You have Alontae Taylor, and while Alontae was a second-round pick, and you usually expect solid things from a second-round pick, I don't think anybody expected the type of year that we got from Alontae Taylor. That bodes well for the future. And to have such a big hit like you got out of Rashid Shaheed, maybe Rashid is going to be the number 2 wideout to Olave next year. I do think that they'll need to address the position more accurately. Shaheed is probably going to be a solid number 3. But what a football season that young man has had. The improvement from Cesar Ruiz, who a lot of people had already, myself included, had already given up on coming into 2022. Ruiz has missed will miss the last chunk of the season on injured reserve. But he has played so well. Eric McCoy, his value has been stated over and over again by us on our show. The coaches know it. So there are some positives to take away from this thing. The negatives, the run defense getting pushed around, especially over the first half of the year. The baffling decisions on offense, and just the self-inflicted miscues that killed this team over and over and over again, especially through the first half of the year. People were talking about how this would have been a scary team for some opponents to face in the playoffs. I agree with that. People were mad at the Minnesota Vikings for laying an egg against Green Bay. And the Panthers for squandering opportunities against Tampa Bay last week to officially eliminate the Saints from playoff contention. I get that frustration, and I'm there with you. But guess what? The New Orleans Saints dug their own hole with 4 or 5 games that they easily could have won and probably should have won at least a few of those. So they'll be sitting at home through January and early February because of their own doing. And that's the biggest frustration that you got to take away from this if you're a Saints fan, player, or coach.
Absolutely. I'd say the positive for me was the biggest one for me was Alontae Taylor, because that was a guy that draft night, everybody said the Saints reached on, and all of a sudden it looks like that wasn't so much a reach, that the Saints actually hit pretty well with Alontae Taylor. I think that's a big positive. I'll also say this is the defense in the second half of the season, because again, this offseason, we've talked about it so many times, media that were in New Orleans for training camp saying that this was going to be one of the best Saints defenses of all time. And the defense was so hyped up, and for the defense to come out and really struggle early in the season. But you look from like week 8 or week 9 on, and the Saints are like top 5 in just about everything outside of rush defense. They've played extremely well. It's been good to see them turn a corner. And it's also good to see that a lot of those guys are going to be coming back.
Yeah.
And you could even throw Marcus May into that category of, you're going to get Marcus May hopefully next year for really like the first time, because he hasn't played a whole lot of games this year. And that could be a positive as well. So I'm going to take the defense as the biggest positive, particularly Alontae Taylor. Negatives, the offense is frustrating. Even the games that they've won the last couple weeks, they've been frustrating. There doesn't seem to be any cohesion or any rhyme or reason for the play calling, what they're doing, how they've utilized certain pieces of the offense. I mean, we've talked about this all year. That's got to be one of the biggest disappointments. And just to echo what you said, Bob, you can go back and look at this schedule and circle maybe 3 games in particular that you can go back and be like, the Saints should have definitely, absolutely won this game. No question. And then you're looking at a different story. You're going to make the playoffs at that point if you win even 2 of those games. And Tampa Bay in particular would have been a huge one that they should have won. That's one of the biggest disappointments of the year. That was a game where you had to have it and you didn't. But that tells me more about the Saints than it does anything else. Is this Saints team wasn't there. They weren't ready to take that step and make the playoffs. Their pieces missing, whether that's players, coaches, what have you. And hopefully they can kind of sew some of those things up in the offseason, because it's going to be back-to-back years potentially where the Saints finish with the same record and they finished about a game out of the playoffs. So we'll see what the Saints are able to do in the offseason. But that's my biggest positive takeaway and my biggest negative takeaway. Bob, predictions for this game. Yes, it doesn't really affect anything in terms of playoffs. It will affect one thing. We haven't talked about it yet, so I'll make sure I get it in real quick. Is remember, Philly has the Saints pick. So if the Saints win, it becomes a worse pick for Philadelphia. So if anything, if you just don't want to see Philadelphia get a solid for a better first round pick, that's why the Saints should win today. It could really end up making a difference, particularly because you'd be better than two teams within your own division with Atlanta and Carolina if you get the win today.
Yeah, not only that, but a win by New Orleans means that it's still been since 2005 since this franchise has had a double-digit losing season, and that comes with an asterisk because of the Katrina tragedy. Before that, you had to go all the way back to the Mike Ditka era of 1999 when the Saints finished 3-13. So again, it's these little things that mean something special to these players. A win solidifies that you're going to be in second place in the division. Again, it's not a big feather to put in your cap. It actually gives you a little bit tougher schedule as far as home and away in 2023, but that doesn't matter to these players. Second place means a hell of a lot better than third place. 9 losses looks a hell of a lot better than double-digit losses. And the Saints defense also could tie another franchise record. If they hold Carolina under 20 points today, that will be 6 straight games that this defense has held opponents under 20 points. That ties them with the 1991 and 1992 Dome Patrol greats for the franchise record of straight games under 20 points. That's some pretty rarefied air, right there. And I think the Saints are going to be extremely aggressive on both sides of the ball. I wrote it in my piece this morning. I look for, especially early on in the game, Taysom Hill to throw a little bit more out of that wildcat formation to kind of keep that Panthers run defense and pass rush off balance. If successful, that'll open up more opportunities for he and Kamara later on in the game. My bold prediction for the day is Alvin Kamara will throw a touchdown pass out of that modified wildcat formation. I think we're going to get big games out of Olave and Rashid Shaheed, but they're going to have to be quick developing patterns, because when you have a tattered offensive line like New Orleans is going to come into the game with, you can't expect Andy Dalton to sit back there for 5 seconds while long developing routes develop. So it's going to be a quick, rhythmic, aggressive Saints passing game. Maybe maybe Pete Carmichael, if he's smart, will dust off some of those old Drew Brees game plans, because I think that game plan would work very well against the Panthers today. Defensively, look for them to really, really get after Sam Darnold. And I look for a big game from the defensive tackles. You kind of cheated when you said that you cheated when you mentioned a whole position as far as X factors and the offensive line. I'm going to do the same defensively and highlight the defensive tackles. It's a position that I have been critical of for most of the year, but this unit has played some pretty darn good ball over the last 3 or 4 games. If they can get penetration on Carolina's offensive line, that's going to snuff out that running game. That's going to give Sam Darnold happy feet. And I already mentioned I love the matchup between Alontae Taylor and Marshawn Lattimore against DJ Moore and those receivers. But you have to get pressure on Darnold to force him to get rid of the ball quick. Pay close attention, because this is going to be the last game in a Saints uniform for a lot of these players. Maybe even some franchise grades. I agree with you, Brendan. I don't think Marshawn Lattimore will be traded or dangled as trade bait, but it's going to be a name floated about. Alvin Kamara, the same. Michael Thomas, we wrote articles about that, and Michael won't be in uniform today, but we wrote articles about that yesterday and the day before. But what about 34-year-old Demario Davis, 34-year-old Cam Jordan, 34 before next season starts? Could they be cap casualties? I hope not, and I don't think so, but you never know. So enjoy the ride with these greats. I look for New Orleans to come out humming on all cylinders, and come away with a game performance that's going to leave most of us saying, "Where the heck has this been all year?" I look for the Saints big. I'm going to go 30-13.
I don't know if I have the know if I have the confidence in this offense to put up 30. But I do think the Saints will leave the fans with a sweet taste in their mouth rather than a sour taste in their mouth. I'll take the Saints 24-17. And I'll give Kamara the touchdown record. I think that's a pretty easy one. I'm not as bold as you, Bob, throwing touchdown passes for Alvin Kamara. But I'll say Kamara gets the touchdown record. I think the defense does enough, and I think the defense has one of their better games of the season. And maybe the big one is I'm going to say the Saints win the turnover battle. How many times has that happened this year?
Not many.
I say the Saints win the turnover battle. And so, yeah, I'll take the Saints. I'll take the Saints in this one, 24-17. We have a lot to talk about this offseason, guys.
Yeah.
So please make sure you tune into the Bayou Blitz on Wednesday nights. Before we say farewell for now, because we'll be back for halftime. Bob, where can everybody follow you and the Blitz?
Folks, thank you for tuning in to our final pregame show of the 2022-23 season. We appreciate, Brandon and I appreciate your support, for this show and our Bayou Blitz, show that goes every Wednesday. Hopefully you'll continue that support. And to do so, you can follow me individually. I'm on Facebook, Bob Rose. I'm on Twitter at BobbyR2613. You can follow all of our works at the Saints News Network or at Saints News on Twitter. And please check out our Bayou Blitz Facebook page and at Bayou Blitz Pod over on Twitter. We streamline all of our articles and all of our media work, not only on our personal pages, but through those pages and through the Saints News Network as well.
And for me, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at BT Boylan, Bayou Blitz. Every Wednesday, you can follow my work with the Saints News Network at saints.media. Biggest thing with the Bayou Blitz is, some of you guys know that there's a giveaway. So make sure you're commenting on any of our live streams. You got to comment your name. You got to comment your favorite moment from the Bayou Blitz this season. And then just comment done. And we will be able to go back, as YouTube does a great job of archiving all these things, and be able to look at those comments and see if you guys actually did all that. Now, for some of you who have social media, you can go on social media, follow at Bayou Blitz Pod, and we'll have giveaway details coming up soon. So, guys, until halftime, we hope you guys enjoy the final game of the season for the New Orleans Saints. Until then, find peace, spread love, practice positivity. We'll see you guys at halftime.